when it comes to Leverkusen, I think, and Manfred Schwabel said this in a roundtable that I typed up an article, I think last year. And there's Manfred Schwabel, of course, the boss of SPVG Unterhaching, said that like, oh, everyone raves about Leverkusen, but forgets the fact that they don't actually produce any German talent. And there's a point to be made. They spent a lot of money on their youth academy. And the turnover has been significant this summer. Lots of players out, lots of players in. Erik ten Hag first hired, then fired. As quickly as he arrived, he was gone. And he was also very, very quickly replaced with Kasper Hjulmand, Danish coach. I wrote my newsletter on this, Stefan. I personally think this is a really interesting appointment. One that comes with significant risk, but also potentially with a lot of upside.
Yeah, I was just checking now to see if Julian Brandt came through the Leverkusen Youth Academy, but he didn't.
No,
do you remember who?
Wolfsburg.
Wolfsburg, well done. Yeah, exactly. Totally forgot about that. Yeah, I think Kasper Hjulmand, it's going to take a while to get used to. I think he's going to be a really interesting head coach. I think in a lot of ways, very different from Xabi Alonso, but also very different from Erik ten Hag. And I saw some reports that he was the guy that they initially wanted to hire after Xabi Alonso announced he was leaving. He initially rejected them, but I think, obviously he's kind of had a change of heart after the summer. Maybe he didn't get the offers that he was expecting. And he's like, okay, well, maybe Leverkusen's the best thing that I've got on my plate right now. I think he's a really interesting head coach, Manu. I've always been really impressed with him, what he did with the Danish national team. Obviously, did really well with them in a lot of ways, got them to the semi-finals of the Euros, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, where they narrowly lost out to England.
Controversially,
and then gave Germany a good game at the last Euros as well in the last 16. I think what I really like about him is that tactically speaking, he seems to be a very flexible head coach. He can play a back three, he can play a back four, he can play, very intense kind of gegenpressing football. They can step back and play more direct if necessary. He seems to be a very kind of, I guess, reactive head coach to what he has in front of him. And I think that's maybe what Leverkusen were looking for after Xabi Alonso, where he had, a very, very, very clear system that only he could work with, and only the players that fitted into that system would get game time, which I'm sure was a frustrating note for Leverkusen a lot of the time. And then there was Ten Hag, who came in, who also has his own very kind of typical style of playing, very Dutch, very 4-3-3. And as we said after that Werder Bremen game, there were so many moments in that game where I thought, these players don't really line up with this system. This player doesn't make sense there. That player doesn't make sense there. Kind of wanted to give Ten Hag the benefit of the doubt on the day because, it's only their second game of the season, third game of the season, I suppose, if you include the Pokal match. But it felt like he was trying to kind of shoehorn players into his system as opposed to taking a look at that squad and thinking, right, this is the best formation. These are the right tactics to get the best of all these players. And I think that's probably why they've gone for Hjulmand, because he potentially can do exactly that. It'll be interesting to see how he does, Manu. He hasn't coached at this level before. I know international football is very high. To me, it's a different kettle of fish. It's a different style of football. Yeah. But yeah, it's his first foray, if I'm not mistaken, into a top 5 league in Europe.
No, it's the second. He was at Mainz.
Of course he was. Sorry, I completely forgot.
Yeah, he was at Mainz, and that had it was a bit of a roller coaster ride. So I did write about.
2014. Gosh.
Yeah, I wrote 1,500 words on him yesterday because it's a fascinating appointment, and what happened at Mainz is really interesting because he came in and they went out in the Europa League qualifiers against Asteras Tripolis. He, of course, came in also to replace Thomas Tuchel, which is a tough act to follow, right? And so, he comes in, loses to Tripolis, then goes out in the German Cup, and people were like, oh man, this is going to end badly. Then the first 8 Bundesliga games, he goes undefeated, is third in the league. Everything looks kind of well, and then the wheels just came off, right? He just... a lot of draws. He ends leaving with 5 wins and 10 draws and 8 defeats. And that is, on a first glance, not a great record, but there were so many games in there where if it had gone swung the other way, then he'd probably would have been in charge longer at Mainz. He just couldn't get the results, kind of get his teams to get these results that they needed. And then, of course, the relegation battle on matchday 24, he was fired and replaced by Martin Schmidt, who then kept Mainz in the league. Christian Heidel at the time said, to the tune of, he's a great coach, tactically, but at this stage we just need a new impulse to keep this team in the league. And Hjulmand then returned to North Zealand, where he coached. Then it was an advisor, and his coaching career seemed to kind of peter out from there. Sometimes you don't really get a second run in a top 5 league if you had a record like that to begin with. And then out of nowhere took the Denmark job. And you mentioned those Euros, Euro 2020, which took place in the summer of 2021, right, because of COVID. And they lose that first game against Finland, but that was also the game where Christian Eriksen collapsed, right? And there's some interesting quotes about how, in retrospect, if he would make this decision again, he would have ordered the players to the bus and leave the stadium rather than continue playing the game. They lose that game, they lose the second game to Belgium, and then they beat Russia 4-1 to advance to the round of 16, where they beat Wales, then they beat Czechia. And then they lose to England, controversial penalty call by my Dutch friend, referee Makele. He's always good for controversy. England advanced to the final where they lose to Italy. But he rebuilt the Danish program. Did a very good job building an academy for Danish football. He was working as an advisor. I think he wanted to take a year off, Stefan. That was the real issue here. Why Leverkusen weren't able to get him initially. And I convinced him there's some really interesting parallels between the fact that his assistant coach at Denmark, I forgot his name, is a former assistant coach to Xabi Alonso. So he was working in parallel roles. It's my article. Ismail Costano, I think is his name. So there was a familiarity. Leverkusen and Hjulmand often been in contact. Alonso and Hjulmand often been in contact. So, so I think, when you say he was maybe initially their number one choice, it makes a lot of sense because he is fundamentally very close to Xabi Alonso and probably would have made that transition a little bit easier. But I think he too, Hjulmand himself, wasn't sure whether he was still a club coach, right? Whether that was still a role that he could fulfill. And it's a very demanding role, right? It's different than being a national team coach. It comes with different demands. National team coach, you get to be grouped together, you spend a lot of time scouting, then you get your group together and you have to make it work right away, right? Which in this case could actually be for his benefit because he comes in and he finds this totally new group of players. Some of them, as you mentioned in one of the shows, Malik Tillman, they seem very down, and now he has to come in and sort of kind of build them up again after this really kind of bad experience with Erik Ten Hag. So, the skills that he showed in the past, he's very empathetic. He's a strong leader, has led his national team in a moment of extreme crisis, like seeing your teammate collapse and literally die on the field, only to be resurrected is I think something that a lot of teams would not have come back from, right? We talked in great lengths in the past about how Thomas Tuchel always cited that bomb attack on the bus as the moment where his relationship with the club broke down, and he actually managed to stay on for another 3 years afterwards with Denmark and be together with this group. Those are all strong indications for me that this could work, but then we also have to look at what happened at Mainz and the fact that didn't work, right? So there is a little bit of risk in the fact that his last stint at the top 5 league wasn't successful. Having said that, Stefan, sometimes past failure builds future success.